January 26, 1989, and the town of Brattleboro, Vermont, was celebrating its annual Winter Carnival, a 3-day festival featuring ice sculptures, winter sports competitions, food vendors, and activities that drew thousands of visitors to the small New England community. Main Street had been closed to vehicle traffic and transformed into a carnival midway, with booths selling hot cider and maple treats, stages featuring live music, and displays of elaborate ice sculptures that glistened under strings of lights. Sophia Martinez was 7 years old that Thursday evening, a girl with long dark brown hair in 2 braids, warm brown eyes, a gap between her front teeth that showed when she laughed, and an outgoing personality that made her talk to everyone. She wore a bright red parka with fake fur around the hood, dark purple snow pants, white moon boots with silver buckles, rainbow-striped mittens on a string through her sleeves, and she carried a small pink flashlight her father had given her. Sophia had come to the carnival with her parents Miguel and Rosa Martinez, and her older brother Carlos, who was 12, and the family had been enjoying the festivities since arriving at 5:30 p.m. At approximately 7:15 p.m., the family was watching ice carvers compete near the town square, where artists used chainsaws and chisels to transform large ice blocks into sculptures, and a crowd of about 200 people had gathered. The carving demonstration was fascinating, and Sophia stood with her family at the front of the crowd, mesmerized by how the artists turned frozen blocks into detailed animals and figures. At 7:28 p.m., Carlos asked his parents if he could walk to a vendor booth selling hot chocolate about 50 yards away, and Miguel gave him money and told him to bring drinks back for everyone.
"Sophia, do you want to go with your brother to get hot chocolate?" Rosa asked. But Sophia shook her head because she wanted to keep watching the ice carvers work on a sculpture of a leaping deer.
"Stay right here with us then," Rosa instructed, and Sophia nodded while remaining focused on the carving demonstration, standing between her parents in the crowd. At 7:32 p.m., one of the ice sculptures being carved suddenly cracked with a loud sound, and the crowd collectively gasped and shifted forward to see what had happened, creating a brief moment of movement and distraction. The carver had accidentally hit a weak point in the ice, causing a large section to split off, and for approximately 10 to 15 seconds the crowd's attention was completely absorbed by the dramatic moment. When the excitement settled and people resumed their positions, Rosa looked down expecting to see Sophia standing beside her, but her daughter was no longer there, and the space where she'd been was empty. Rosa's first thought was that Sophia had moved to get a better view of the damaged sculpture, and she called her daughter's name while scanning the immediate area around them in the crowd. But Sophia didn't respond, and Rosa couldn't see the distinctive red parka anywhere in the crowd that was now settling back into watching the carvers continue their work. Within 30 seconds, Rosa was grabbing Miguel's arm and telling him Sophia was missing, and both parents began calling her name urgently while pushing through the crowd looking in all directions. Carlos returned with hot chocolates at 7:35 p.m., to find his parents frantically searching and asking people if they'd seen a 7-year-old girl in a red parka with braids and rainbow mittens. By 7:40 p.m., dozens of carnival attendees were helping search the area around the ice carving demonstration, checking behind vendor booths and walking through the crowd calling Sophia's name. In approximately 10 to 15 seconds, during a moment when a crowd's attention was focused on a cracking ice sculpture, 7-year-old Sophia Martinez vanished from a packed carnival on Main Street without anyone seeing where she went. If you want to hear what happened in this disturbing case that remains unsolved, make sure you're subscribed, hit that like button, and comment where you're watching from or what theories you have. Now let's continue. Brattleboro police were called at 7:45 p.m., and Officer David Martinez, no relation to the family, arrived to find hundreds of people searching Main Street and calling Sophia's name into the winter night. The ice carving demonstration area was examined for any sign of Sophia or evidence of where she might have gone, but the packed snow and hundreds of footprints made identifying specific tracks impossible. The bright red parka Sophia had been wearing should have made her visible in any crowd, and the fact that nobody could see her anywhere despite the distinctive coat was deeply troubling. Carnival organizers made announcements over loudspeakers asking Sophia Martinez to come to the information booth and requesting all attendees watch for a missing 7-year-old girl. Rosa was hysterical, unable to understand how Sophia could have disappeared in the 10 seconds they'd all been distracted by the cracking ice sculpture, and Miguel was frantically running through carnival crowds showing people his daughter's photo. By 8 p.m., the Winter Carnival had effectively shut down as hundreds of attendees abandoned festivities to search for Sophia, checking every vendor booth, alleyway, and business along Main Street. Vermont State Police arrived with additional resources, and Sergeant Robert Chen immediately coordinated a systematic search expanding from the ice carving demonstration area where Sophia had last been seen. Every building along Main Street was searched, including shops, restaurants, and offices, with police checking storage rooms, bathrooms, and any space where a 7-year-old might have wandered or been taken. The carnival grounds covered approximately 4 blocks of downtown Brattleboro, and with thousands of people moving between activities, identifying who'd been near the ice carving demonstration at the exact moment Sophia disappeared proved extremely difficult. Bloodhounds were brought from a neighboring county by 9 p.m., and the dogs were given Sophia's scent from a stuffed animal in the Martinez family's car, and they began tracking from the demonstration area. The bloodhounds picked up Sophia's scent and tracked from where the family had been standing. But instead of following the main carnival route, the dogs led toward a side street about 30 yards from the ice carvers. This side street had been partially closed for carnival parking but wasn't completely blocked, and vehicles could access it from the far end, creating a possible route for someone to park and quickly remove a child. The scent trail led approximately 50 feet down the side street before ending abruptly near where several cars had been parked, suggesting Sophia had been placed in a vehicle at that location. Detective Chen interviewed witnesses who'd been near the ice carving demonstration, asking specifically about the 10 to 15 second window when the sculpture had cracked and everyone's attention had been diverted. One woman remembered feeling someone brush past her during that moment of distraction, possibly moving quickly through the crowd, but she hadn't seen clearly who it was or noticed a child being carried. This detail suggested someone had used the cracking ice as an opportunity, grabbing Sophia during the seconds when the crowd was focused elsewhere and moving her quickly before anyone noticed. FBI was contacted by 10 p.m., given the potential for abduction from a public event, and Special Agent Catherine Wells arrived from the Burlington field office with resources and expertise. Agent Wells theorized that someone had been watching the Martinez family, had waited for a moment of distraction, and had grabbed Sophia when the ice sculpture cracked and everyone's attention shifted. 10 to 15 seconds is actually enough time for a prepared abductor to act, Wells explained. They grab the child, cover her mouth to prevent screaming, and move quickly through a distracted crowd to a waiting vehicle. The fact that nobody had heard Sophia scream or call for help suggested either she'd been taken so quickly she couldn't react, or the abductor had immediately silenced her through threats or physical means. By midnight, the search had expanded to cover a 10-mile radius from Brattleboro, with roadblocks established on major routes and officers checking vehicles leaving the area. But over 4 hours had passed since Sophia's disappearance, and if she'd been taken in a vehicle, the perpetrator could have traveled significant distance in that time, making roadblocks potentially ineffective. The case generated immediate media coverage across Vermont and neighboring states, with Sophia's photo appearing on late-night news broadcasts, showing her dark braids and gap-toothed smile. The bright red parka became a critical identifying feature, and descriptions emphasized the distinctive coat and rainbow-striped mittens that would make Sophia recognizable if anyone saw her. Tips began coming in from people who'd been at the Winter Carnival, and each person who'd been near the ice carving demonstration was interviewed about what they'd seen during the critical seconds. But the dramatic moment of the sculpture cracking had completely absorbed everyone's attention, and nobody could recall seeing a child being taken or anyone acting suspiciously during those seconds. One teenager mentioned seeing a person in a dark hooded jacket moving quickly toward the side street around the time the ice had cracked, but couldn't provide details about gender, age, or whether they'd been carrying anything. This vague description became a lead that investigators pursued, though hundreds of people at the carnival had been wearing dark winter clothing, making identification based on such limited information nearly impossible. The ice sculpture that had cracked and created the distraction was photographed and documented, and investigators wondered if the crack had been accidental or if someone had deliberately damaged it to create the diversion. But the carver insisted it had been a genuine accident caused by a weak point in the ice, and examination found no evidence of sabotage or deliberate manipulation. By late January, the intensive daily search operations had been scaled back after 2 weeks, produced no trace of Sophia despite thousands of volunteer hours and extensive professional investigation covering hundreds of square miles. Detective Chen focused on the theory that someone had been at the Winter Carnival specifically watching for vulnerable children, and when the ice sculpture had cracked, they'd seized the opportunity to grab Sophia. But this theory raised disturbing questions about whether the crack had truly been accidental, or if someone had somehow caused it to create the exact distraction needed to take a child. The ice carver who'd been working on the deer sculpture was investigated thoroughly, including background checks and polygraph testing, but he had no criminal history and was clearly devastated that his accident might have contributed to Sophia's disappearance. Surveillance camera footage from businesses along Main Street was collected and reviewed, but in 1989 camera coverage was limited, and most captured only building entrances rather than the street where the carnival had been held. One camera from a bank showed a portion of the side street where the bloodhounds had lost Sophia's scent, and investigators examined the footage frame by frame looking for vehicles or people during the critical time frame. The footage showed several cars parked on the side street, and around 7:33 p.m., a dark-colored van or SUV appeared to pull away from the curb and drive toward the far end of the street, though the image quality made identifying the vehicle impossible. This dark vehicle became the investigation's primary focus, and police issued alerts for dark vans or SUVs that had been in Brattleboro on January 26th, but tracking such vehicles without license plates proved difficult. Agent Wells interviewed Miguel and Rosa extensively about their family life and whether anyone would have motive to take Sophia, but the Martinezes were a close-knit family with no custody disputes or concerning relationships. The theory that Sophia had wandered away on her own was considered but seemed unlikely, given her personality and the fact that she'd been standing between her parents focused on the ice carvers. By March, the case had generated national attention, featured on America's Most Wanted and in newspapers across the country, with Sophia's red parka and rainbow mittens becoming iconic elements. The Winter Carnival was canceled for 1990 out of respect for the Martinez family, and when it eventually resumed in 1991, new security protocols were implemented including designated lost child stations and increased police presence. Rosa quit her job as a teacher's aide and devoted herself to searching for Sophia, distributing flyers throughout New England and appearing on local television programs keeping the case in public consciousness. The pink flashlight Sophia had been carrying was never found, and investigators speculated it might have been dropped during the abduction or taken along with Sophia, eliminating a potential piece of evidence. By 1995, the case had essentially gone cold with periodic reviews but no active investigation, and Sophia Martinez became another child who'd vanished from a crowded public event in a brief moment of distraction. Age progression photos were created showing what Sophia might look like at 12, 17, 25, and these images were distributed through missing persons databases as years passed. Miguel struggled with anger and frustration, unable to accept that someone had taken his daughter in front of hundreds of people and had never been identified or caught. Carlos was devastated by guilt, irrationally believing that if he hadn't gone to get hot chocolate, if he'd been standing there instead, somehow Sophia wouldn't have been taken. Detective James Morrison took over the cold case in 2005, and he was troubled by how perfectly timed the abduction had been, occurring during the exact seconds when the crowd was distracted. Morrison investigated whether the ice carver or anyone connected to the Winter Carnival had been involved in staging the accident to create an opportunity for an accomplice to grab Sophia. But extensive investigation found no evidence supporting this theory, and everyone connected to the carnival had solid alibis and no connection to missing children cases. By 2015, Sophia would have been 33 years old, and the Martinez family held memorial services each January 26th in Brattleboro, standing near where the ice carving demonstration had been. True crime podcasts discovered Sophia's case in the 2010s, and several shows featured detailed episodes about the Winter Carnival disappearance and the 10-second distraction that had led to a child vanishing. The case proved that predators could exploit brief moments of crowd distraction at public events, and that even with hundreds of potential witnesses, abductions could occur in plain sight. The years passed slowly for the Martinez family, with 1989 becoming 2000 and then 2010, and Sophia's room remained exactly as it had been, filled with stuffed animals and drawings of a 7-year-old who'd loved art. Detective Sarah Chen took over the cold case in 2018, and she brought modern investigative techniques to evidence that had puzzled investigators for nearly 3 decades. Chen used enhanced video analysis technology to examine the 1989 surveillance footage from the bank, hoping modern software could extract details about the dark vehicle that wasn't possible with 1989 technology. The enhanced footage revealed that the vehicle was likely a dark blue or black van, possibly a Dodge or Chevrolet model from the mid-1980s. But the license plate remained too blurry to read even with enhancement. Chen also used advanced database searches to look for similar cases of children disappearing during moments of crowd distraction at winter events, wondering if patterns might suggest a serial predator. She identified 3 other cases from New England in the late 1980s and early 1990s, where children had vanished during brief distractions at public gatherings, though connecting them definitively to a single perpetrator proved difficult. One case from New Hampshire in 1987 involved a 6-year-old who disappeared during fireworks when everyone was looking at the sky, circumstances eerily similar to Sophia's disappearance during the ice sculpture incident. Chen coordinated with investigators from these other cases, sharing information and looking for commonalities in suspect descriptions or vehicle sightings, but no clear patterns emerged. By 2020, Sophia would have been 38 years old, and age progression photos showed a dark-haired woman who strongly resembled Rosa, though the family feared she'd died shortly after being taken. Miguel had died in 2016 from a heart attack, and Rosa believed the stress of living 37 years without knowing what happened to Sophia had contributed to his early death. Carlos, now in his 40s, had become a private investigator specializing in missing persons cases, dedicating his career to helping other families find answers he'd never gotten about his sister. "I was 12 when Sophia disappeared," Carlos told a documentary filmmaker in 2019. "And I've spent my entire adult life trying to understand how someone could take a child from a crowd in 10 seconds and vanish completely." The Winter Carnival continued annually in Brattleboro, but longtime residents never forgot what had happened in 1989, and some avoided attending out of association with the tragedy. Chen investigated whether anyone who'd been at the 1989 carnival had concerning backgrounds or had been present at other locations where children went missing, but tracking people 3 decades later proved challenging. She also examined whether the timing of the ice sculpture crack had been truly random, or if someone had been watching and waiting for exactly that type of distraction to occur. Ice carving experts were consulted about whether someone with knowledge could predict when ice would crack, or could subtly weaken a sculpture to cause failure at a specific time. But experts confirmed that ice cracking was largely unpredictable, and that causing a specific crack at a precise moment would be nearly impossible, supporting the theory that the abductor had simply exploited an accidental opportunity. Modern DNA databases and genealogical research had solved many cold cases from the 1980s, but these tools required biological evidence or living persons to test, neither of which existed in Sophia's case. The bright red parka Sophia had worn became a symbol of the case, and Rosa had kept it preserved in plastic, unable to donate or discard the coat that had been the last thing her daughter wore. True crime communities online debated whether Sophia's disappearance had been carefully planned or purely opportunistic, with some convinced the abductor had been waiting for any distraction, and others believing it was random chance. The rainbow-striped mittens on the string through Sophia's sleeves were never found, and investigators believed they'd been removed by the abductor to eliminate a distinctive identifying feature. Chen used social media and missing persons databases to search for adult women who might match Sophia's description and have questionable information about their early childhood, but this approach yielded no promising leads. By 2024, the case remained one of Vermont's most baffling unsolved disappearances, discussed in forums about missing children and studied by investigators trying to understand how abductions occur in crowded public places. Rosa, now in her 70s and in declining health, continued to hold memorial services and speak to media outlets, keeping Sophia's case in public consciousness and hoping someone would finally come forward with information. 35 years is a long time to carry a secret, Rosa told reporters in 2024, and I believe someone out there knows what happened to Sophia, and I pray they'll find the courage to tell the truth before I die. By 2025, 36 years after Sophia Martinez vanished from the Brattleboro Winter Carnival, her case remained completely unsolved with no credible leads or physical evidence explaining how she disappeared in 10 seconds. Detective Chen continued to review the case periodically, and she maintained that somewhere in Vermont or beyond, someone knew what had happened to Sophia during that moment when the ice sculpture cracked. Abductions that occur in crowds are among the most difficult to solve, Chen stated in a 2024 interview. because everyone's attention is focused on the same distraction, creating a window where someone can act without being observed. The town of Brattleboro installed a memorial in the park near Main Street with Sophia's photo and a plaque reading, Sophia Martinez, 1982-1989, lost during Winter Carnival, Forever 7, never forgotten. The question mark after 1989 acknowledged that Sophia's death was never confirmed, though statistical reality and the complete absence of contact for 36 years suggested she'd likely died shortly after being taken. The case stood as a reminder that children are vulnerable even in crowded public places, and that predators can exploit brief moments of distraction to commit crimes in plain sight. And it highlighted the enduring pain experienced by families who lose children to unexplained disappearances, living for decades with questions that have no answers. Winter festivals across New England used Sophia's case in safety planning, implementing protocols for immediate lockdown procedures when children go missing, and designating adults to monitor crowd movements. The reforms came decades too late for Sophia, but event organizers hoped that heightened awareness might prevent other families from experiencing similar tragedies. True crime researchers continued to study the case as an example of how timing and opportunity converge in abduction scenarios, and how crowded events create both safety and vulnerability. Some theorized that the abductor had been at the carnival specifically looking for an opportunity, and had acted when the ice sculpture cracked, a crime of opportunity rather than elaborate planning. Others believed the perpetrator had been watching the Martinez family specifically, had identified Sophia as a target, and had used the distraction to execute a plan they'd been developing. The bloodhound's trail to the side street suggested premeditation, as the abductor seemed to have known exactly where to go to reach a vehicle quickly and escape before the alarm was raised. Rosa lived with Sophia's case files and memories, never leaving Brattleboro despite the painful associations, and she maintained her daughter's room as a shrine to the child who'd never come home. She told interviewers that she stayed because the last place Sophia had been was Brattleboro, and leaving felt like abandoning her daughter even though logic said Sophia wasn't there. The pink flashlight Sophia had carried became a symbol in missing persons advocacy, representing the Light family's hope will eventually illuminate the darkness of not knowing. Carlos continued his private investigation work, and he returned to Brattleboro every January 26th to stand where his sister had disappeared, still searching for answers 3 decades later. "I was supposed to protect her," Carlos told a reporter in 2024. "I was her big brother and I went to get hot chocolate while someone took her, and I've carried that guilt for 36 years even though I know I was just a kid." Modern technology, including advanced facial recognition and AI analysis, had been applied to carnival photographs from 1989, hoping to identify suspicious individuals in the crowd near the Martinez family. But the limited photographic evidence from 1989 and the poor quality of available images made this approach largely unsuccessful, yielding no viable suspects. Chen believed that if Sophia had been abducted, the perpetrator might have committed similar crimes before or after, and she continued searching for patterns in unsolved cases from the 1980s and 1990s. But without DNA evidence or concrete connections between cases, proving a serial predator had been operating in New England remained speculative rather than factual. The case proved that even after 36 years, some disappearances remained completely unexplained, with physical evidence leading to dead ends and witnesses unable to provide information that solves the mystery. And it demonstrated that families can search for decades without finding closure, living with the unique torture of not knowing whether their loved one is alive or dead, suffering or at peace. As of 2025, anyone with information about Sophia Martinez's disappearance is urged to contact Brattleboro Police or Vermont State Police, as even small details from 36 years ago could potentially solve the case. The story of Sophia Martinez reminds us that 7-year-olds should be safe at winter carnivals with parents standing beside them, that 10 seconds is enough time for tragedy to strike, and that some questions may never be answered. And on Main Street in Brattleboro, where a girl in a red parka once stood watching ice carvers before vanishing into winter darkness, her memory endures as a reminder of innocence stolen. The case stands as testament to how vulnerable children are even in crowds, how predators can exploit moments of distraction, and how some families never stop searching despite decades without answers. Rosa continues to hold memorial gatherings each January 26th, and she speaks to other families of missing children, offering support born from 36 years of living with unanswered questions. The winter carnival ended that night, Rosa told a support group in 2024. But for my family, the silence began and has never ended, because we've lived 36 years without hearing Sophia's voice or knowing what happened to her. Detective Chen reviews the case files regularly, and she's instructed future investigators to never close the case, to remain alert for new information, and to believe that answers are still possible. Someone walked away from that carnival with Sophia, Chen states, and until that person is identified or comes forward, we keep investigating, we keep hoping, and we never forget. The bright red parka that should have made Sophia visible in any crowd became the haunting symbol of how someone could disappear despite being distinctive, and how predators can act with stunning efficiency. And somewhere in Vermont or beyond, in memories someone has kept hidden or in evidence that hasn't been discovered, the answer to what happened to Sofia Martinez on January 26, 1989, exists waiting to be revealed. The winter carnival that should have been an evening of joy and community instead became the night the Martinez family lost everything, and the mystery of what happened during those 10 seconds remains unsolved. Chen believes that deathbed confessions or new witnesses might eventually emerge, and she holds hope that before Rosa dies, the family might finally learn what happened to Sophia. Families deserve truth, Chen says, and Sophia deserves to be found and brought home. And I believe that even after 36 years, someone knows something that could solve this case. The case of Sofia Martinez stands as one of New England's most haunting unsolved disappearances. A child who vanished in the time it takes to gasp at cracking ice, gone in an instant that has lasted 36 years.